Hey guys, welcome to Ben Wrenchin. My name's Ben and today I'm wrenching on this 2019 Audi RS5. This belongs to a buddy of mine and this is definitely the coolest car I've ever had in my garage. And it's probably the coolest car you'll ever see on my channel. This car has 444 horsepower from the factory and my buddy didn't think that was enough, so he got a kit from a company called Integrated Engineering. And what it does is allows you to run E85 on this car, and the IE website claims that that can gain you up to 150 extra horsepower. So there are two parts to this Stage 1 Plus upgrade. This is the second part. This is the TrueFlex Sensor Kit. The first part of this Stage 1 Plus upgrade had to do with some internals in the fuel pump. There's another kit that comes with these parts here. You need this special socket that he got from Integrated Engineering. And then there's just a few parts that you change out inside the pump. That was easy and I didn't record it when I did it, which I really should have. So I will briefly go over that when we get in here and show you what I did there. But in this video, I'm just going to show how I install this TrueFlex Sensor Kit. It came with everything we need, and I've even got some pretty detailed instructions from IE's website. They did not sponsor this video, although they did send us some cool merch. So this is not sponsored by IE. I just wanted to show you how I'm doing it because I think this is pretty cool. It's probably one of the more difficult things I've done. So I'm going to learn as I go, and I'm going to take you guys along with me. So let's pop the hood and get started. So I'm going to start by taking off this cover. It just pops right off. And the fuel pump for the first part of this upgrade is over here. So I had to take this out and switch out some internals. It's got two triple square M10 bolts on it that hold it down. And then you just have to take off the fuel line fittings. Once you've got that out, you flip it over. You take off the top part with this special socket. That gives you access to a big spring with a cap like this on it. You push that down and there's a retainer. You get that retainer off and then this cap will come off. Take the spring out and it is surrounding a piston that looks like this. This is actually the piston that I took out. And at the base of the piston, there is a sleeve that you take out and replace that too. This is the sleeve that I took out. So the kit came with all these pieces. That's why this is all I have left. You basically open that up, take this cap and retainer off, take this piston out and take this sleeve out, replace them all with the new pieces, put it back in, and you're good to go. So let me know if you guys want to see a video of how I did that. I wasn't sure how difficult it was going to be and I didn't know what I was doing, but after doing it, it was actually way easier than I thought it was going to be. So I could take this back out and take it apart and show you how to do it, but honestly, it was easy enough. I'm pretty sure you guys could handle it. And what that does is allows higher pressure for the fuel in that pump. That does not get you ready for E85, but at that point you're ready for this kit, and this will allow you to run E85. This connects directly to the ECU and allows the car to automatically trim the fuel. So essentially you can run anything from regular gasoline all the way up to full E85 and anything in between there, so you can really run any mixture of fuel. It's supposed to pretty much take care of everything for you after you get this installed. And there's also an app by IE that you can use with this system that will read the ethanol content of your gas in real time. So it sounds pretty painless, but all we're going to do today is install a sensor in this gas line right here. We'll have to run some wiring to get power to it, and we're also going to have to connect it to the ECU. But like I said, this kit comes with everything you need, and these instructions should make it pretty simple. So I'm going to run through this as I do it, and we'll see how difficult it really is. We've got a list of required tools, which I have all of those. Before you start, you should read the whole thing, which I did, and I would suggest that as well. It shows you everything in this kit, which everything is here, and I'm going to start by removing the windshield wipers. With the wipers off and the cowl out of there, I need to take this piece off here. I've got a trim panel tool that I'll use to get in a groove that is located right here. And I'll get behind this and just pry this out. And with that off, we've got access to the fuse panel. There's an 8mm bolt right here that I need to take off to pull this whole panel down. And that was not very tight at all. All right, there's that screw. And there are two more 8mm screws in the corners at the bottom of this panel. So I'll take both of those out. All right, there's one. And there's the other. And then to pull the rest of this off, there's a retainer clip right here that I need to pull out to get it to release. And then I can just pull this down. And same thing on the other side, if I just wiggle it, it's getting loose. And if I release this, there are two screws right here. The instructions don't tell me to, but I'm gonna go ahead and take these out and see if this will come all the way off. I just grabbed a small extension for those, but they're also 8mm. There's one, and the other one's right here. All right, and there's the second one. And with both of those off, I've just got this plastic retainer right here. Once I pop that loose, this whole thing comes out. So that's where those two screws were. I don't think I needed to take those out because I think this is supposed to come out too. It is not coming out easily and I didn't want to break anything. But I imagine that is where that connector is that I need to disconnect before I take all this out. There is a wiring harness up on top. That wiring harness is attached to this. It's got a little plastic connector right here. So I really just need to release that and this piece should come out. And if I pull this out far enough, I can get this trim tool in here and I can use this trim tool to get underneath that wiring harness and pop that connector out. And it's still hung up on something. And there's actually another wiring harness attached to the back of it. I can see it right behind that wiring harness. And it's way back there, but I can use some needle nose pliers and pinch this side of the fastener to get it released. There we go. So that was attached right here. I was actually able to just get behind it and push it out, and then that released this whole thing. I don't know why it's got that fastener on the back going backwards. Makes it pretty difficult to take out, but I was able to get it. And now I've got a lot more room in here, which I think I'm gonna need. So with all that out, I can see what's next on my instructions. And for the sake of remembering what goes where, I put all the screws back in the locations where they came from. So there was one here, one right here, and one on the other side. And then the two screws holding this to that. And I've laid out everything that I've taken out so far so that I can just put it all back in reverse order. At this point, I want to mention that you should disconnect the battery. It's located in the trunk. There's a latch right here, and you lift up on this and find the battery down there. I'm leaving the positive terminal connected, but I did disconnect the negative terminal and wrapped a towel around it to make sure it doesn't make contact. While I had the battery disconnected, I used my cheapo charger to charge the battery. I thought I would use this heavy-duty, expensive one that I got from a company called Andaman. It's nice, but it doesn't have the AGM battery setting. So I dug out my old cheapo one and it worked. So I will link this in the description. It does have an AGM setting. It did charge the battery back to full. And I think I picked this up for less than 20 bucks. But I waited too long into the process to disconnect the battery. You'll see later on that that caused me some issues. So I would go ahead and do that now. There are some steps to take to disconnect the battery properly. The thing you're trying to avoid is getting a bunch of warning lights on the dash after you reconnect it when you're done. I'm not exactly sure what that process is. What I read online is that you can put the driver window down, the hood up, and the trunk open, and then you can disconnect the battery without issues. I will not be able to confirm whether or not I caused alarms because this car just got worked on before it came to me, and it already had those alarms going on. So I am going to have to clear those at the end anyway. So if you cause any alarms, I will show you how to clear those at the end. But with the work that we're doing, it's a good idea to disconnect the battery. And the last thing I need to remove in here is this kick panel. I'll pop this off with a flat blade screwdriver. And it's got a T30 screw that I'll take out. And that was already pretty loose, which is nice. So I'll take it out the rest of the way, and then I can pull on the back of this to get it out. And there's the rest of the fuses. And there's no fuse diagram on the back of this, which is kind of weird. So I have no idea what any of these fuses go to, but I got it off, so that's good news. It looks like there's a plastic part that goes down into that hole. I can't tell if I broke it off or not, but maybe just pull up on that when you pull it out. So I think that's everything we need to take off down here. For now, I'm gonna break for tonight and I'll hit the rest tomorrow. Day 2 on the Audi. I'm a few pages into the instructions that I got from IE. It snowed last night, so it is a crisp 48 degrees in my garage right now. I've got my tiny heater kicking on full blast, but it's not doing much. But the good news is I got quite a few parts off yesterday. I'm burning through these instructions, and today it looks like we'll get into some of the more difficult stuff. So I'm at the point where I'm ready to start routing some of this wiring through. And it wants me to start with this fuse connection, so I'm going to get that out. So it looks like I'm going to route this wiring harness through into the fuse box. When I read through this, I was a little confused about these blue and brown wires, but it looks like I don't need to attach them to anything. But everything else on this side is going to go through to the fuse box. This is going to go into spot 1 on the fuse box. It came with 2 fuses I'm going to put in here. And then there's also a ground connection that I need to mount inside the car. But I'm going to go ahead and route this through and then get the fuses in after I get it in there. And I get to make use of my new koozie, so things are looking good already today. So this whole wiring harness is going to go in here, The only thing that's going to go through the firewall is going to go through that X right there. And it looks like the orange and green wires are the only thing that go through there. So I'm going to pinch them like this and push them through that X. And I got it to poke through. Luckily this wiring harness is pretty rigid, but I did get it through there and I've got it sticking out the other side. So now I can pull this cover all the way off. And there's a small access hole right here that I'm going to fish that wire through. And it looks like this is going to travel pretty far, so I'm going to pull this through and give myself some slack. And then I'll do the same thing. I'll use this rigid side of the wires and I'll poke that through the access hole. And then I'll jump under the hood and see where that's going to come through on the other side of the firewall. On this side of the firewall, underneath the wiper motor, there's a small rubber boot on this side that I need to cut, and that'll give me a hole big enough to get that wire through. You want to cut the biggest opening that you can. Don't pay attention to these other cuts that I made. They're too small. Not the cleanest cut, but that'll work. Now I can run the orange and green wire through there. The next step in the instructions tells me to install this sensor into the fuel line. So I'm going to go ahead and put these fuel line fittings on both sides. When you put these on, they snap on pretty good, and then they snap even harder if you push real hard. So you want to make sure you get those installed all the way on, just like that. And then it shows it installed in the line just like this. So this is how I'm going to install it. It does not have an in-out marking on these, but I know it needs to be orientated the right way. So I'm going to do it just like this because that's how it's pictured here. There's about 4 inches of line that we need to cut off. That's going to be from here to here. Now the instructions say just cut 2 inches of line to give yourself extra in case you need to cut off more. I'm going to install it on this line here, and I need it to be straight. So I need a straight section that is long enough to fit this in. I could put it right here, and that looks like about the best place to put it. Problem is that when I do that, I'm getting real close to both of these curbs, and the sensor is also going to ride right up against here. So I don't like that. My only other option is to do it right here, but that's got a hard fuel line going into this soft line, and I don't know how far it goes. So I may have less room to work with here than I do over here. So I think this looks like the place to put it. I'm going to go ahead and cut 2 inches off right here. I'm going to center it in between these bends. That way if I need to cut off more on one side or another, I've got room on both sides to do it. Now this line is still pressurized. I was not able to find where the fuel pump relay is. Normally before cutting into a fuel line, you would pull the fuel pump relay and then start the car and let it die. Or you can do it the lazy way like me and just go ahead and cut the line and soak up all the gasoline with an old towel. So I'll get as much of this towel under here as I can. I want to make sure and cover up as much as I can. That way if fuel goes spraying everywhere, it won't get on any of this. And that looks about as good as it's going to get. So I grabbed all the necessary PPE, some gloves, and some safety glasses. I'm going to cover this line up as I cut it and hopefully contain the gasoline as much as I possibly can. First thing I need to do is cut this cover off. It's pretty easy to cut with this X-Acto knife. I just try to angle it upward so I don't cut into that line just yet. So I'll cut through this till I get as much of the fuel line exposed as I need. The name of the game is just not cutting into that fuel line just yet. So there we go. I scored a line all the way down, and that helps to just pull it back and cut up the line that I scored. I'm going to go just past this gray marking. I know I'm not going to get into that bend, so this is about as much line as I'm going to be able to cut off anyway. And I feel like that's pretty good, so I'm going to go ahead and cut off the rest of this. Try to get a straight cut around here. I can just go around all the way with the knife, and there we go. So about as much cover as I cut off is how much hose I need to cut anyway. So I'm going to cut right here and right here. I'm going to start with about 2 inches, so that's going to be about this section here. And so I'll just start right here and then cover it up. I'll just go slow and be careful. I felt it cut through and gas spray out. It was really only a little bit, so that's good news. The car has sat for a few days, so it gave me some time to depressurize the fuel lines. But that wasn't as much gas coming out as I thought there'd be. So now that it's depressurized, I can go ahead and cut right here. And don't open the door while you do this because gas will come pouring out. Apparently the fuel pump kicks on when you open the door. I'm going to guess where 2 inches is and cut there. And that's as much line as I cut off. I'll put these hose fittings on the end of the hoses before I put the sensor in. I put the nut facing that way on both sides. And then I'm going to put the sensor in just like this because that's how it's pictured. I'll push this fitting into this hose and I'm going to make sure that it gets seated all the way down. Can pull this line out of this bracket to make it a little easier to work with. And I'll just keep working this down until it's all the way in. I'm a little too close to this bend, but that's okay. I can bend it straight and then push it down. And that's as far as it's gonna go because it's hitting right there. These hose clamps have 7mm screws on them. So I'm gonna back this screw off as much as I can. So I'll put that right about there and then I'll tighten it down. I'm not gonna tighten this too much because that's just a plastic fitting underneath, but I wanna make sure I can't pull it out at all. So I'll watch on this side for this clamp to start digging into that tube, and then I know that it's tight enough. And that feels good, I can't pull it out. So I'm gonna stop there, I think that's tight enough. So I'll do the same with this side. Just pop this in here. I'll get it seated up against the base of this fitting. I can twist it while I'm pushing to get it to seat all the way down. In hindsight, it would have helped to lubricate these lines before I tried to shove these in here, but in my defense, I used gasoline for that. At this point, I will say I see why they told you to only cut 2 inches off. If I'd cut any more off, the ends of these fittings would be into these curves, and that makes it a lot more difficult to install. So I think that's good. I'm gonna go ahead and move this clamp down, and I'll get this one tightened down too. And I'm paying attention to how much of the end of the screw is sticking out on the other clamp. And that way I can match them and hopefully they'll both be tight enough. So I can't pull either of them off, so that's good. I can take my gasoline soaked towel back out. I can put this line back in this bracket. And now I can see where this is gonna sit. So I think that looks pretty good. I will see if I can get this line underneath this cover. It might have been under here originally when I did the work on this pump. But hopefully I can at least get this fastened together and then that can all live under there. And I think that looks pretty good. So since I know that opening the door will prime the fuel pump, before I move on, I'm gonna go ahead and do that and make sure there's no leaks here. I opened it twice and didn't see any leaks, so I think we're good there. So I can go ahead and plug this purple connector into the sensor. Make sure I get a good click and pull on the back and make sure it doesn't come off. It says to run the rest of this wire through the secondary firewall back through. I imagine to get over underneath the wiper motor, because it says to get this where you have the orange and green wires coming through. There's a few tabs on the back here. I can just release those one at a time. And that gives me enough room to get this wiring harness through here. I'm gonna put this underneath the ground wire, and that way I know it'll hold it down. And then once I've got the rest of this on the other side, I can line everything up and then just push this back down. And that looks pretty good. I will go ahead and zip tie this right here. It looks like a natural place to zip tie it, just to make sure these wires stay right next to this wiring harness. I changed my mind. I decided to run this connector through here because it's gonna look a little better. But to fix that, I can just release this connector, run it underneath here, and I feel like that looks better. And then I'll run this connector through to the hole that I cut earlier. And now I can run this connector through that same port. With it wedged in there pretty good, I can push from the back and hopefully push it through further. I'm using a T15 screwdriver just because it's small and straight, and I can get on the back of that connector and then push it in, and that worked just fine. So that connector is in there. It's in good enough that I can push it through further. And now I've got the orange and green wire where it needs to be next to the ECU. And I can grab this other connector and pull it through. And it looks like that's about as far as it's gonna go. So it may be caught up on something, but that's gonna give me plenty of room. I'll put both of these fuses that came with the kit in here. And these are a very tight fit. And once I've got both of those in there, I can plug this into spot 1, which is on the top left. I'll point the fuses down because it feels like that's how it's supposed to go. I'll leave this here just like that. It looks like there's a spot here where these wires can come through. So now I just need to attach this to the ground. This ground bolt here is a 13mm. You can tell it's a ground because there's bare metal all the way around, so it is meant for a ground to go here. So I'll loosen that up and hope that this ground connector is as big as this bolt. This electrical connector is just a little bit too small because it's gonna pinch on this bolt once I tighten it down. So I'm gonna put the flattest side down and bend it back as much as I can. And I'll just hope that it doesn't break right there when I tighten this bolt down. I need to get a good connection, so I need to tighten it down as much as I can. I'll hold this connector up here while I tighten this down. And that's tight, so I'm gonna stop there. I can't move this at all, so it's gotta be pinched in there good enough. And then I can attach this connector to the signal port of the dongle, and I'll just make sure I get a good snap. So now that I've got this pulled through, it's gonna connect to the sensor port on the dongle, and this can only go in one way, so you can't get this wrong. And there we go, everything's connected. I just need to splice in the orange and green wires. To connect the orange and green wires, I need to take all these connectors off of the ECU and pull this out. It's got 2 tabs here, but first I'm gonna disconnect these. There's a black tab in the center on the back that you can push down, and then you can push this gray part forward. That disconnects the connector. And then I'm going to use a white paint pen to write the number of the connector on the bottom side. That way it won't show when I connect these back together. And that way I make sure that I get all these in the correct spot when I go to put them back. So I'll write a 5 on here, and it's a lot easier to press down this black tab if you've got some angled needle nose pliers. And these are also color coded, so you can't mess it up if you pay attention to the colors. There's 4. 3, number 2, and number 1. So like I said, these are color coded, so you can also write down which color came out of which spot. So now I just need to pull these 2 tabs down. I'm going to wedge my pliers into this one and pull back on this one as I push up on the ECU, and then it comes right out. And it says we're going to tap into 2 wires on this black connector, which was connector 1 that I took off last. And we're looking for pins 17 and 18. There are some numbers in the corners. So I've got 1 and 2 at the top, and then it goes 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then 9 starts at the top here through 14. This row starts 15, 15, 16, 17, and 18. So these are the 2 pins here that have wires on the back that are green and orange. And I can look inside the back of the connector and see that there is a green and an orange wire around that area. So I'm pretty sure we're in the right spot. At this point, I'm a little confused why IE sent these solder style wire connectors. I can't just strip this sheath and then cut the wires and solder these wires into them. You can do that with power wires, but these are signal wires, so I can't do that. This isn't in the instructions, but what I'm gonna have to do is depin those 2 wires, pull them out the back, slip this on the top. Then I'll have to make a cut in those wires without cutting the conductor on the inside. So I'm just going to cut the plastic sleeve. I'm going to solder these wires in, and then I will heat shrink them using this. So I guess to their credit, these do work, but they didn't mention having to depin that connector. But that's how I'm going to do it because it's the rightest way I can think of doing it. What you don't want to do though is just pull those wires out, cut them, and then solder these wires in. It still needs to have a connection to the original wire, and even if you were to cut that wire and then solder it together, you still have a lot of potential for there to be fluctuations in the voltage, and that would give you a bad reading. That can cause all kinds of issues. So rather than moving forward with what they say to do in the directions, I'm going to get a depinning tool and do this the right way. So even though I'm at a standstill here until my depin tool gets here, I did notice that there's a nut in this kit, and I wasn't really sure what this was for, but it just hit me. This is also not in the instructions, but I think this is going to help me get that ground wire secured better. I can put this nut behind here, and then this isn't going to be sandwiched in there. So I'm going to try that and see if I can get a better connection. So I'll take this all the way off. I'll thread this nut all the way down this bolt, make sure that connector is flat, and then I'll get this back onto the bolt. And now when I tighten that down, it's got a lot more room and it's not going to crush that connector. So I don't want to tighten it down a bunch, but I do want that connector to be solid, and it would be better if it had a washer on it. So this nut does thread on this bolt right, which makes me think that is what this is for. And thanks to my coffee can of screws, nuts, and washers, I found one that's perfect. It'll sandwich the connector onto that nut. So I put the nut on the bolt first and then the connector. I'll put the washer on top, and then I'll screw all of this in, holding the connector where I want it. It'll sandwich between the nut and the washer, but it's not pinched. So as long as the head of this bolt sticking out doesn't impede anything when I get all the trim back on, then this is going to be just fine. And I don't need to go super tight, and I can wiggle that connector and tell that it is solid. So I assume that's what that nut is for. I don't know why I had to add a washer, but this works as long as I can get the trim back over this and this isn't touching anything. But I think that's going to be okay. We'll see when we put everything back together. So I did order a depinning tool. It's going to be here tomorrow. So while I wait for that, that's going to wrap it up for day 2. I will see you guys tomorrow for day 3, the final day. All right, guys, it's day 3. I'm on number 35 of my 41 step instructions, and I got this depinning kit. It's got 41 pieces, so I'm sure one of those will work for this, but I'm ready to depin these wires out of this connector and connect these orange and green wires. One of these depinning tools has a point on it. On the side with the locking lever, there are 2 dips that I can stick this into and pull this out. So I'll just slowly wiggle it back and forth. And a pick is going to work best on this, so I can stick this under here and pry up gently on both sides, and I can get it to move quite a bit. And one side broke off in there. So that's the first bit of bad news. I am able to get the piece out that broke off, so I'll have to replace that. At the top of the connector, there are two tabs that if you pull this way, you can then slide it towards you, and that'll release this back cover, and that will expose the back side of the wiring harness. Right here, there's a small zip tie that I'm gonna cut, and it goes through the back side of this cover and loops around right here. So I'll need to zip tie that back down at the end, but that just goes through these two here. Here are the two release tabs on the top of this cover. You can pull up on these and that'll release the plastic latches on this cover, and then you can slide it right off. And now that I've got all that out, I can see down in this center area where the bottom section of this purple connector is, and I can just use this D-pin tool to push down on it and push it out. And I really thought this would be easier to take apart than this, but it's proven to be pretty difficult. But I can get under each side with this D-pin tool and then slide it out the rest of the way. And so these two pieces actually fit together so that it locks in place when you have both in there. So I will have to look at replacing that one. I'll probably just put it back together with this one side knowing that it's holding it in there, but I do need to replace that. So at this point I can unravel this, and this will give me access to all these wires. I will likely replace this with electrical tape because that's what I have on hand. But for now I'm not gonna cut it in case I wanna just wrap this back around these wires when I'm done. So I'm gonna expose as much of these wires as I can. I'll leave this tape hanging out here. And right there in the middle, I can see an orange and green wire wrapped around each other. And I can follow those up into the back of the connector. And I can see that those are the only wires that are orange and green. So I'm confident those are the wires. So I'm gonna use this depinning tool with the point at the end. I'm gonna grab the orange and green wire from the back. So I'm gonna take my pointed depinning tool and pull back on the plastic right next to that connector, and then the connector slides right out of there. And I'll start with the orange wire because it's on the bottom. So I'll pull that plastic piece back, and then the connector slides right out, and the orange wire is out of there. So I'll do the same with the green wire, grab it from the back and push forward, grab the plastic tab, pull it down, and pull the wire out. Now I just need to remember how those were in there. There's an open side of the connector that goes on top, and the closed flat side of the connector goes on bottom. And these are in there just like that. Next, I'll use these wire strippers to strip back some of the plastic sheathing on these wires. I'm going to go about in the center of the wire that I have exposed and very carefully split open some of this wire. And now I have a small section of this wire exposed. I'll strip back the end of this green wire from the sensor. I'll put that in line parallel with the section of exposed wire. Slide my butt connector over the whole thing. Slide the butt connector down so the solder piece fits over the wires. And now I'm ready to use my heat gun. I'm gonna melt the solder first and then sweep my way out to melt the plastic after the solder has started melting. I'm gonna put some cardboard on top of the connector so that I don't heat up any other wires. And I'm gonna make sure that I keep this orange wire away from it too. So with this sitting just like that, I'm gonna put my heat gun on the lowest setting. I'm going to turn it on low and make sure that I let it warm up a little bit. I'm going to slowly turn up the heat and make sure that it's not too hot, but it's going to be hot enough to melt that solder. And at this point, I've still got it on low, and the heat setting's at about 3.5. And I'll start in the middle and sweep my way around this solder. I've got it situated so that I don't have to touch it, and it's going to sit still. So I'm just going to sweep this around until that solder starts melting. I'll turn up the heat on it a little bit, and this takes a while, and it feels like it's not going to work until that solder finally just starts melting, and then it's pretty quick. I'll turn up the heat just a little bit more, and there's the solder starting to melt. So you can switch to this side to try to even out the heat. As it slowly melts, it's going to seep into those wires and get a really good connection, and keep turning up the heat until it all melts. At this point, I can also sweep it back and forth and start melting the rest of the plastic. That's going to shrink the whole thing down and get a really good seal. Do the same on the other side, and I'll turn the heat up all the way and just go over it one last time. All right, now that it's had time to cool off, I can move my cardboard. So I can just pull on the wires and make sure everything feels good. That feels like a really good connection. So I'll try to move this out of the way and do the same with the orange one. The problem with that is I only have a little bit of room to work with, and I'm going to be directing the heat right at all this. So I'm going to do the best I can to point the heat that way, but we'll see how this goes. So I'm going to strip off some of the wire from the sensor, make sure I didn't pierce through any of the conductor. Try to make these the same length. So I'm going to strip this about right here and just expose some of that wire without cutting through any of it. It should be enough there. It's just a small section and I probably should have pulled it more, but there is exposed wire and that solder will take care of that. So same thing here. I've put the exposed wire in parallel with the end of the wire from the sensor. Slide this heat shrink on, and then as I feed this down, I can make sure I get around the end of the wire, and then I'll just make sure that solder is over both sections of exposed wire. I've set it where it's stationary and the solder is over both exposed wires. I'll put my cardboard around everything else, move this wire out of the way as much as I can while I heat this one. And now I'm ready to heat the orange wire. So I am going to pull up on it a little bit just to get it away from everything else, and then I can point my heat towards the cardboard. And now I can pull on both sides of the wire and just make sure that everything's connected. It feels tight. It looks like there's a good connection in there. I don't see any exposed wires, so I think we're good there. The last thing I want to do is put heat shrink around both of these. So I'll slide that down and make sure that that's covering everything. I'll trim it down a little bit to give me more wiggle room on this side of the wires to get those pins back in. And that looks pretty good. I'll go on low, hit both sides of it, and that feels a little better. So now I'm ready to put these back in. I'm going to remember that the green one was on the top and the orange one was on the bottom, and that the open side goes up and the flat side goes down. I'll start with the orange one. It's pretty difficult to get in here with all these other wires in the way, but I can pull them back and give myself a little bit more room. And I'll slide the orange one back in and push it till it clicks. There, I heard a click. I can pull on it and make sure it's not coming back out, and then I'll do the same with the green wire. I didn't give myself a lot of extra room, so it's difficult to turn the wire the way I need it. Helps if I point my light towards the back side of this. I can see down in there a lot easier, and I can use some needle nose pliers to push that green wire in all the way until it clicks. There we go. And now I can pull on both and see that neither is going to come out, so these are locked into place. And I can also look on this side of the connector, and I can see the ends of those terminals right here. So I know that those are seated properly. Everything there looks the same as all the others, so we're good there. And now I can rewrap this back around. I'm going to try and include those signal wires as much as I can in this wrap. And I'll see if I can rewrap this the way that it was. And I will finish this off with some electrical tape. So I'll start that where this ends and go all the way down back over this. And that'll make sure that this stays tight. I feel like it's supposed to be adhesive, but when I pulled it off, it lost all the adhesion. So I'll just wrap this around a few times just to make sure it's gonna stay put. I'll cut it off right here, wrap the rest of this around, and then come back up just to make sure the tape is adhered. And that way there's no loose end hanging off at the bottom. So now that I've got everything back in, I can go ahead and put this piece back in. It just slides in the bottom right here, push it in all the way till it clicks, and then I will put this piece back just like this with the one side, and I will look for a replacement. When I find the replacement for this piece, I'll link it in the description. I'm pretty confident that I'm gonna have to go to an Audi dealer to get that. I've got the purple terminal lock back in on both sides. Now I can slide this cover back on the back side. So it just goes straight on top. It'll slide down in, and then I can push down on it until it clicks. And then I'll just need to put a small zip tie around here. These smallest zip ties I have are clear, so that's gonna have to do. I'll slide that through this hole, bring it around, slide it up through the other hole, and then pull this through. I'm not gonna go super tight, so I'll go ahead and cut this off. And before I reconnect all these connectors, I'm gonna fasten the ECU back down. I don't really know why they told me to take it out because I really didn't need to. I'm gonna use my pick on this side because it's got this groove in the middle that I can get this pick in and pull that side back. And once that's down, I can do the same on this side. Pull my pick out and then snap it down. And now I can reconnect these. So I know I numbered them on the back, but I realized afterwards that it's color coded right here. So they make it even more difficult for you to get this wrong. So I'm gonna start with the black one. I'm gonna seat it down as far as I can, making sure that this is as open as it can be. And then I'll push down on the back as I pull this down and make sure that it feels like it's seating real well. If it doesn't, I can back out and try again. There we go, that one feels good. Next is green. I'll do the same thing here. Release this up all the way, push it straight down as far as I can get it, and then push down as I push that down. So I'll do the same with all of these. And there we go, the ECU is back in place. All right, so the hardest part is over. I feel really good about that. Before I start putting everything back together, I'm gonna zip tie down every new wire and at least make it look a little bit better than it does right now. So I'm gonna get about 50 zip ties in here, get everything put back together, put the dash back together, and then I'll finish up tomorrow and show you guys the end result. Here's a quick look at all the tools I used. I will link the IE kit that I used as well as the instructions and most, if not all, of these tools that I used. It's really not a lot. All that I didn't already have was the Depinning Kit, but this is everything I used and I got it done. So a few things I will say in retrospect. I'm not 100% sure that the actual sensor is flipped the right way, so I will let you know after we figure that out. There is not a whole lot that I would have done differently. Some of the wiring, the routing could have been done better, especially underneath the cowl. I really just tried to keep it away from heat as much as I could, but I probably could have routed that better. The instructions were not super clear on how to depin the ECU. In fact, they didn't include that at all. I did some research on that, so do your own research if you're going to be doing that. And the same with taking the dash apart. That was a little bit different than the instructions, but I figured it out. But the important thing is we got the job done. I feel good about everything, so we'll pick back up tomorrow when we flash the TrueFlex. We'll reconnect the battery and clear all the alarms, and then we'll show you what this thing can do. All right, back at it. It is day 4, the final day. I didn't need to take 4 days, by the way. I just split the work up. That way I didn't rush myself. You could definitely get this done in a day, but it's nice to take your time when you can. So I'm going to reconnect the battery, make sure that there's no alarms. We can clear those if there are. Then we're going to flash the TrueFlex, make sure it works and that we can read the ethanol content. And that's really it. With the battery reconnected, I can turn the car on and we'll see if we got any alarms. All right, and it's still got quite a few alarms, so we'll have to see if we can clear some of those. And I hooked up my scan tool to the OBD port. I'm gonna see if I can clear the codes with this. And I'll just hit clear fault code. Fault code's cleared. Yes. And now it says there's no fault codes. So I'll see if that worked. I'll turn the car back on and see if that cleared any of them. So a lot of these faults have to do with the front bumper, which is the work he just had done to it. And he said a lot of those faults were as a result of that. So I think some of those we can't clear because of that. There may be some ongoing issues there that need to be taken care of. So that's why I'm not able to clear all the codes. It looks like though I did get rid of some of them. So hopefully you guys have better luck than I did. But it's at least back to the state it was in before I got it, and possibly even better. So we also flashed the TrueFlex with the phone app. That part was really easy, so if you've made it this far, that's gonna be the easy part. It took about 15 to 20 minutes, but we finally got it flashed and we were able to read the ethanol content of the gas that's in the tank right now. So he's gonna have to put some E85 in it and see what this thing can do now. I don't have a way to gauge how much horsepower he gained because I don't have a dyno, but I'll probably do a follow-up short or something just to show you guys kind of what the results were with this. Overall though, it went really well. I feel like everything went pretty smooth. I guess some feedback I have about the IE kit. It's a good kit. It's pretty pricey, but it wasn't my money. And I feel like some of the parts were a little cheap, especially the fuse connector that went below the foot pedal. But the rest of the kit was nice. It all plugged in real easy. The instructions were okay. I feel like they got me as far as I needed to be able to get it done on my own. There were some things that were a little bit different. Taking apart the dash was the best example. I had to figure that out on my own because it didn't match this. And my biggest complaint would be that they did not show anything about how to wire this into the ECU. I did my own research there, and I would suggest that you guys do the same if you're going to wire this into the ECU wires the way that I did. It went pretty well. I just don't have a lot of experience with electrical, but I got it done. Everything's in. It's working well. And so I would call this a huge success. Like I said, IE did not sponsor me for this video. We just bought the kit from them. There's a lot of other upgrades that we could do, and I'd really like the chance to partner with IE on those. So hopefully they see this at some point. But that's really it for this one, guys. So I really appreciate you guys watching. Hopefully this helps you install this kit. And if you're on the fence about it, hopefully it pushes you in the direction of going for it. I think it's pretty cool. I think this car is awesome. And I know that my buddy's going to be really happy with it. So make sure to subscribe. Hopefully in the future, I'll do more on this car. Drop a comment. Let me know how your project goes. And I will catch you guys in the next video.